Venezuelan president has just been captured. After years of economic strife, international sanctions, and a divided opposition, a sudden military move has taken him out. Was it justified? Probably not. Was it legal? Definitely not. My name is Oliver Heute. Welcome to a special episode of Putschcast on what just happened to Nicolás Maduro. From socialist strongman to powerless detainee. Over the next hour or so, you will hear from people on the ground with points of views and stories you may not have heard in recent weeks on mainstream media. Venezuela, is it all that bad? We speak with a German cultural envoy in Caracas and an Australian expat who prefers life in Venezuela. With me in the studio today, my co-host David. This is our first Putschcast on South America.
It is. And what a time.
Did you see this coming?
Not this particular series of events. An absolute surprise. I don't think anyone anywhere around the world thought that this particular action would be taken by the US and that it would ultimately be successful.
We have a WhatsApp chat going in our Putschcast community, and Dave, you remember I dropped in there that maybe that historic, as Trump calls it, meeting in Alaska between him and Putin wasn't all about Ukraine, because days later the fleet started moving towards the south. Tensions built up. I think they were one-sided tensions, and we speak to our guest about that later on. Where did you think this was going? Because clearly Trump had an agenda, but what happened now surprised everyone.
Obviously, ratcheting up pressure, showing that they were not afraid to use military force to gain leverage with the Venezuelan government. Nobody thought, and again, listening to a lot of experts, no one expected this level of intervention, what we would call an extraterritorial abduction of a sitting leader, yes, a dictator. Is this a crazy precedent that the Trump administration is setting? Is it a warning sign? Did they just choose to pick on one of the weakest links in South America to show that it could be done? What is all this saber rattling about, and what will happen to Venezuela in the aftermath?
I think what it's about, we all know, oil. And what is so good about Trump is that he just doesn't bother hiding it. He's been very, very pragmatic about it. He mentioned we want control of the oil. And that's all he cares about. And apparently it's beneficial to the American and the Venezuelan people. But
it's not a quick fix. If you talk to or listen to anyone who has any idea about the crumbling infrastructure in that country and the type of crude that Venezuela has access to, yes, they have the largest reserves in the world. Billions upon billions of dollars of investment will be required to make that a viable business enterprise for the American companies. Only Chevron currently have access to the market in Venezuela at the moment. I know Trump wants to open it up. How that will work is anyone's guess, and how it will work in cooperation or not with the Venezuelan government is anyone's guess as well.
And for historical context, this has been brewing really for 25 years, because there's a man called Hugo Chavez that you really need to understand in order to make sense of what just happened. Without knowing too much about him, look him up on YouTube, look up his speeches. He was really in the news a lot. He is a charismatic leader. Even if you don't speak Spanish, it's very easy to see why what he says resonates with people.
He had an incredible cult of personality in that country. There is still a shadow of it that I think Maduro has tried to inhabit, but very big shoes to fill.
You give a message to the American people in English?
I'll try. I will try. A great leader of you, Martin Luther King, is my leader. You know, he said, I have a dream. His dream, Martin Luther King's dream, is your dream, is our dream. It's my dream.
His body didn't do the duty that he wanted it to do, so he ended up in Cuba dying of cancer. And this is where the man comes in that today's episode is about, Nicolás Maduro, because he was the then vice president, as I understand it.
And his appointed successor, yes.
David, you have done a bit of research on Maduro before we speak to people on the ground. Tell us more about this man who's now in handcuffs, with a blindfold, all over social media.
He may have been to New York already. Who knows? I mean, it's nothing probably that he hasn't seen before, right?
And I assume he didn't give consent to any of his photos being used.
No.
Who's this man?
Nicolás Maduro. His father was a trade union leader, and he was raised under the influence of his father's politics. He attended high school. There are no records whether or not he finished, and of course, there's a long history of socialist leaders either not finishing or finishing school or going to university. He joined the Socialist League of Venezuela, a Marxist-Leninist party in the early 80s. At the age of 24 in 1986, Maduro was sent as a representative of the Socialist League to Cuba for a year of political training. Upon his return, he started working as a bus driver in Caracas' city metro system, and he founded the syndicate, a syndicate of bus drivers in 1991. So he was politically active almost immediately upon his return. He became active in the Transport Workers Union, so a more formal organisation, trade workers union organisation in the late 80s. And he founded one of the country's first informal labour syndicates. He met his future wife, Celia Flores, when she headed the legal team that won freedom for Chavez in 1994. So there is a link there. This woman is also, she wields considerable power within the regime, or did until the extradition. She was also removed from the country as well. After Chavez was pardoned and released, Maduro joined the movement of the Fifth Republic, a socialist political party, and in 1997 to run in the 1998 elections. He was elected to the National Constituent Assembly while Chavez won the presidency. So these two men are linked from this point in time. Chavez ascends to power. In 1999, and this is where Maduro has his hands on turning Venezuela from a democracy into really what we will call a one-party state. He was a member of the National Constituent Assembly that rewrote the constitution that was part of Chavez's ascent to the presidency. He served in the Chamber of Deputies, which was eliminated when the legislature became the unicameral National Assembly, in which he began serving in 2000. So he's there from the start in terms of Venezuela's shift from a multi-party democracy to one which you could say is technically a democracy, but we know how the most recent elections in that country have gone. After 6 years in office, he was designated as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he became Vice President in 2012 as Chavez's health began to deteriorate.
Which is 13 years ago. 13 years ago is a long time to have a big impact as a president, especially in a one-party state. What's his track record since then? Have things improved, gone worse, stalemate?
Almost immediately upon assuming power after Chavez's death, there was an election which Maduro won with a very slim margin in 2013. One of the first acts of his presidency was expelling US diplomats, calling them historical enemies and accusing them of poisoning Chavez. He labelled the domestic opposition fascists and that they were working to divide the country. Now, this man, again, very different to his predecessor, did not have the same charisma. The economy at this stage was collapsing. Global oil prices were affecting revenue in Venezuela, and there were protests, rising number of protests on the streets, and number of protesters, 43 protesters, were killed in this particular incident. One of the problems facing Venezuela was the over-reliance on the oil industry. Other infrastructure and other economic sort of sources of revenue were neglected. And once oil prices started to fall, the country struggled to continue to support the social programs that had been one of the bedrocks of Chavez's support up until that point, and again, Maduro's support.
And just confirming, because it is all about the oil, those extractions, the entire industry was under state control by then.
It was under state control since then, and I think historically, probably since Chavez's ascendance to power, not enough investment in infrastructure. So
it's hard to extract as well. That's what all the experts say.
It is.
Not like in Saudi
it's
Arabia.
not like it requires a lot of refining. The money required was not spent to maintain these facilities. So they're not optimizing the asset that they have, that natural asset that they had. So as a result, the ideologically driven nationalization of industries such as electricity and steel contributed, along with the collapse in oil prices, to a massive ballooning of inflation in the country, probably some of the highest levels in the world at that point. Import capability shrank, shortages of staples on the shelves, things such as toilet paper, milk and flour, and medicines, and these became more and more widespread. This obviously led to rising levels of discontent, but economically they were stuck in a cycle that they had no real control over.
Is this the great economic crisis people are talking about? Because both guests that we will be hearing from in a second refer to this really difficult period.
There have been two specific dips. One of those was immediately after his ascension to power, and then there was another one, I think, a COVID-related, but this was a global contraction that affected them as well. The response of the Maduro government after this initial oil shock was increasing authoritarianism. So facing increasing opposition and plummeting popularity, Maduro established a pro-government constituent assembly in 2017 to neutralise the legislature, which was controlled by the opposition at that point. And further protests were met with a stronger and more bloody crackdown, and more than 100 people were killed in protests against the regime. 30 million people in Venezuela, the majority of them facing shortages of essentials, and oil production continued to drop. In 2018, there was another election. Maduro was declared the winner unopposed, but 45 countries, including the US, did not recognize him or his presidency or his legitimacy.
I remember that. That is actually last time I consciously remember seeing Venezuela on the news in the West over a matter of weeks, because there was rioting and there was pressure from abroad, definitely. However, then there was 5-6 years of silence, really.
So, I mean, he jailed opposition leaders, forced others into exile. That was when, I suppose, his unchallenged grip on power was established. Then, of course, we had that sort of strange spasm in time with the global shutdown of the coronavirus and the most recent elections in 2024. He was chosen as the winner. Not many countries outside of Venezuela recognize the legitimacy of this election. Most countries see it as non-transparent. Mass protests followed these as well. Again, met with another harsh crackdown. So basically, this takes us up to late 2024 into 2025. We've talked about the escalating tensions between the US and Venezuela. This is a country which is suffering under sanctions. The US is leveraging as much sort of military pressure as they can, attacking who they claim to be members of the drug cartel, those that, state-sponsored drug cartel elements off the Venezuelan coast. And this spiked, I suppose, or came to a head with the extraordinary events that we witnessed very recently in Venezuela.
And I just mentioned the 2018 election. I remember seeing a lot about that on the news. However, the 24 election was maybe a headline or two. That was it. If it weren't for the Trump administration, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Not at all, not at all. I don't think that any other administration would have carried out such an audacious and, unprecedented act. So this is, again, something that will be interesting to talk about and consider what the future may hold.
And we've seen it all on the news. It was spectacular, without taking a side here, straight out of a Hollywood film. And let's find out from someone who was there, someone in Caracas. And I'm talking about Dr. Thomas Schaumberg. He's the director of the Goethe Institut in Caracas, on the ground. And he took some time to speak to us, not only about the night and how it unfolded, but also more about the political system and the structure underneath Maduro, and why it's very unlikely that things will change.
America strikes. 2 a.m. local time, explosions in Venezuela's capital, Caracas, and nearby areas.
We're going to run the country until such time.
And stunningly revealing, Venezuela's dictator, Nicolás Maduro, had been captured by an elite army strike team known as Delta Force.
We all woke up with the explosions. We heard them, and the next morning we saw Caracas with the smoke. It was a big surprise for us all, but we also have to say that we've been expecting something because we have military presence in the region since August 25. But this scale of attack was something, overwhelmingly surprising.
And you saw something coming. I've heard rumors of you could almost see the American ships in the distance on the ocean. Is that what it was like, or is that a bit exaggerated?
At about 2 a.m., it felt like hell would come. A colleague called me and said that the kids, they just woke up and they didn't know what happened. Another friend lived close to a electric facility which got bombed. I was out 2 hours before it happened, and actually right there exploded a bomb on the satellite station. The next morning, at like about 5-6 in the morning, you still saw the smoke all in different places of the city. And then in social media, we saw the videos coming in, from different sides with the helicopters leaving the city. And during a couple of hours, and then afterwards, until 3 days, several parts of the city stayed dark because the electricity infrastructure was affected by the attack.
So, and I assume you're not used to that either. You've worked in other countries, in Uruguay before. You're from Germany originally, but you're not used to bombing in the middle of the night.
No, like bombing was a new experience.
How are you feeling? Are you okay? Can you sleep now at night, or are people worried?
I'm fine. I'm fine right now. Also, my team is. I mean, we all assumed that civilians are not the target of a possible attack. And this is what actually happened. I mean, military infrastructure and crucial infrastructure for communication and electricity got affected. But the latest numbers, they call also up to 100 victims. Most of them are soldiers and the famous 32 Cuban bodyguards of Maduro. But still, there are civilian victims. And in this moment, when you just hear bombs around you, you don't think of that you're not the target. You're just afraid. And we simply didn't know what would happen next. I mean, me included. I went to the supermarket and stayed there like for 4 hours in order to buy a package of apples because everyone was nervous. That was Saturday and Sunday. And then on Monday, everything got back quite normal to normality, which is logical because Monday, the people have to go to work. I mean, we don't have the luxury here to stay at home because the people, they have to earn a living. And the people were not celebrating. I mean, what we saw all over the world were the diaspora Venezuelans in the city with big groups of Venezuelan migrants, like, for example, Buenos Aires, Madrid, Miami, or Santiago. Here, the overwhelming emotion was uncertainty and skepticism because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I had the same impression that the Western media mainly focused on the diasporas, even here in Australia, where very, very small Venezuelan community, but nevertheless, they were excited, but also very nervous and worried about their family members back in the country. Now, I'm talking to you on a quite okay internet connection. You've got the lights on, so are things back to normal?
I have to say, I live in a quite privileged area here in Caracas, and our institute has all the crucial infrastructure to be prepared in situations like that. I mean, we have a generator outside, which normally, in normal situations, activates like 3 or 4 times a week. We have 4 stable internet connections and a server which is highly protected, simply due to the experience we faced in the last years. So we simply have to live with that. Also, our private housings, they have their private batteries or small generators. If you can afford it. And others have lived and still live with time frames where they have electricity. But now everything is quite normal. But let me tell you something about the silence. Let's not forget that we have still the same repressive government here on charge like we had before. We only cut off the head. But the first decree, the new president, acting president Delcy Rodriguez, issued in order to find people who support in some kind the US attack. Your political opinion, it's still a risk. Why risk it? Even though I would say that many people were and are happy that that Maduro is gone.
To confirm, lights are back on, food is available in the stores, there's no chaos, or people have gone back to work. There's still uncertainty. However, the government is still firmly in charge. There's no question of who's in power at the moment. And people just waiting for things to happen, I guess. And I assume Venezuelans watch the news all day. But what is media access like? How much information can you get in the country through conventional media? Is that controlled by the state? Is there any alternative media? Or do you have to go on social media? And is that restricted?
There's no free press in Venezuela. And the state's television, the print press, and also the radio stations, they are controlled by the government and spread their narrative. You can imagine that official narrative is totally different from what we saw in social media or what we see all over the world. I mean, from the official point of view, this is an attack of Venezuelan sovereignty when it was, but they kidnapped the president, which is also true. But the whole rhetoric is much more much more aggressive and no undertone of the relief of having the dictator out of the country. That means that, social media, especially Instagram and WhatsApp, are the main information source for the people, and also the contact with the diaspora, because the government, I mean, if you switch on the official TV, you will always see how they condemned harshly and strictly what happened. But, and that's the important thing in terms of transition, they showed also their willingness to cooperate with the US, because they simply know that their political survival right now depends on how they cooperate with Washington.
And not to be kidnapped next.
And not to be kidnapped, or even worse. I mean, the Delcy Rodriguez, acting president right now, she was Maduro's vice president and also responsible for the whole petroleum sector here in the country. So one of the key figures with decades of political experience. And she was there from the first moment when Chavez came here. So this is continuity, which was highly important also to calm the situation, because knowing that the old elites are still controlling the different security apparatus, and also the famous colectivos, so the armed gangs, which are traditionally key figures for the government, they are controlled right now. And this is like an important thing to all of us. So there's no chaos on the streets, because the old elite is still controlling this security infrastructure.
Which is the usual challenge around American or any intervention, that if a government is suddenly removed, which is what this podcast is about, what happens next? And usually America doesn't have a long-term plan. This one is a very odd one, and there's historians and political analysts around the world trying to put this into some sort of pigeonhole. No one's been successful thus far. And yes, we are called Putschcast. Was it a putsch? Probably not, but it was a very strange political event that just happened. And I think we can't foresee yet what is about to happen. What do you think could happen? And what you just mentioned, how does she message this to her own people? So on the one hand side, the devil is in Washington, and what have they just done? We want Maduro back. On the other hand, Trump tells the whole world we're now running this country, and he confirmed just recently that for possibly years to come, the US will be in charge of Venezuela. Question, is that just made up because there's literally no boots on the ground? How does she then collaborate with the Americans, because they're scared of what's about to happen, but simultaneously telling our own people this is the enemy number one for us?
I would not want to be in her position right now, because she has to address very different target groups in her communication right now, because you have the own military, which is the main power base for her. You have the US who expect her to collaborate, and you have the people on the streets who basically don't want her, but also the party, the Socialist Party, who expect her to be a strong leader. Now, I think it's a very difficult situation for her right now to manage. And let me tell you that the statement, "we run the country," was irritating for all of us, not only for the government supporters, but for all of us, because it's a heavy statement. And then, but if we then see what Rubio said yesterday and today, and then Trump got a bit more specific in order to make clear that this is part of the Western and US-controlled hemisphere. We don't want to have the other global players here with influence in the country, like Russia, China, or Iran. And we want American firms back here in Venezuela, like it was before. And the money generated by this activity for reconstructing the infrastructure here, so that U.S. firms can operate freely and economically profiting. That is what they say, no? And they expect this government in this first period to collaborate. And the first signals are positive with that. They did not reject the reopening of the U.S. embassy here in Caracas, and they are free political prisoners from the prisons and from the famous torture center, the Helicoide. It's said to be closed. So there are some signals that show that this government with Delcy Rodriguez is willing to collaborate and open some kind of doors, but we cannot foresee at this moment where these doors will lead.
Yeah, so the Americans are clearly marking their territory there. Vladimir Putin is, especially on social media, shown as a loser in all this. So are other foreign leaders. And you mentioned a 30-odd Cuban bodyguards. So how much other foreign presence is there in Venezuela? And sort of who are the close collaborators with the current regime?
Cuba is one of the main partners. We have a huge social exchange program with Cuban doctors and also in the cultural sector, but the main partners are Russia, China, Iran. Turkey is an important player, and the Caribbean islands, which are governed by left governments. Not all of them, but the left government islands they are. With Petro, Colombia re-established its relations with Venezuela, and there are some kind of constructive collaboration with Lula in Brazil. But we have all the countries that the US do not like on the list of the supporters of this government.
You mentioned Turkey there. I find that fascinating because apparently last year there was discussions of Turkey offering Maduro exile and he refused. That was a story I think we have a lot to learn in the future as well of what actually happened in the background there.
People say that also Delcy played a role in this negotiations. Since April last year, in order to see what are the chances, the opportunities for a transition or for a government, for a Madurismo without Maduro. And she was always one of the names circulating in these constellations. So it's not that kind of surprise that now the vice president, well, constitutionally it's not a surprise, but also politically it's not a surprise that she's there right now.
That's a great theory. Let's explore it a bit. So who is Delcy Rodriguez? What do we know about her? And is she a very ambitious politician? Could she be the future ongoing leader? And is she the first female leader of Venezuela?
De facto, she is the leader of Venezuela because she got sworn in. Because in absence of the president, the vice president gets the role and is now the acting president. She has been one of the key figures of Chavismo and Madurismo from the first hour. She and her brother Jorge Rodriguez is the president of the National Assembly, so the parliament. And then we have the interior minister, Diosdado Cabello. He is the person who most people are really afraid of because he controls the secret service and the colectivos, the gangs, and also the most important security infrastructure. And we have the defense minister, Padrino. These four people were the most powerful, and with them, a couple of families who distributed the power and ruled the country for the last decades. Now Maduro is gone, and Maduro was able to maintain a quite important equilibrium between these different forces. And it will be interesting to see if Delcy Rodriguez is able to do the same. She and her brother together, she has quite good chances until the security forces are backing her.
A vice president that becomes president due to unforeseen circumstances, which reminds me of how Maduro got to power to begin with.
Well, Maduro got to power, and Chavez announced him to be his successor, which then happened. And his rival is I just mentioned Diosdado Cabello. So during all this time, there was this rivalry between Diosdado and Maduro, which definitely also maintained this fragile and fragmented system, which is Chavismo. Now, Chavismo, the socialist movement, is which is running the country for 1999 is 26 years, is not a homogeneous bloc. It's a fragmented group of wealthy and influential families and gangs and military. Different military groups, connections with drug trafficking, which cannot be eroded just because you cut off the head.
They're everywhere. And I've also read a statistic that Venezuela has one of the largest per capita number of generals as well. Apparently, there's almost more chiefs than Indians in Venezuela, and everyone wants their cut.
Because it means that nobody can gain enough power to get dangerous for the leaders,
except for Delcy Rodriguez. Except for Delcy Rodriguez.
Yeah, which leads us to Delcy Rodriguez. She had several key roles in the last governments, beginning with Chavez. She was also a foreign minister, if I'm not wrong. The last time she was vice minister and responsible also for the hydrocarbons, which is the most important pillar of the Venezuelan economy. And she is quite respected internationally because she is an experienced diplomat.
So just to confirm, in other countries you have political parties and they compete for the voters' support, and then eventually they'll form a government, i.e. president. So what's it like? You mentioned Chavismo. Is that a party that does that, and then there are small opposition parties, or is this a movement with many smaller parties that do it, or is there a party infrastructure? What's the political system like?
Well, we have a lot of political parties actually here, and Chavismo is the gathering of the Socialist Unity Party, PSUV, and a couple of other parties who join this big movement, who say that they started the Bolivarian Revolution after the election of Hugo Chavez. That's where the name is coming from. And then we have several parties of the opposition, but the opposition is very fragmented and divided because there are some oppositional parties who, for example, decided to candidate during the last elections, and others who decided not to do so because they said the political system here is too authoritarian and progressive, so we cannot candidate. No, so that is the first divisive moment in the opposition. For how far are you collaborating with the system? And then you have the National Assembly with oppositional members of parliament, but other groups of the opposition would say that they are traitors because they candidated. So you have a very fragmented opposition, and the only moment when they succeeded to gather behind one key figure was the July 24 elections with Maria Corina Machado, who could not run for political reasons, but as far as we know, her candidate, the opposition candidate Edmundo González, won the election. And nothing happened then because the official numbers said that Maduro won. And it was quite obvious that something was wrong with the figures because Maria Corina, the opposition, they succeeded to get the actas, so the official results, so the results that are coming out of the voting machines. Yeah, this explains most of the important figures of the opposition are out of the country, as is Maria Corina, who left the country last year.
And she's the one that most people know because of the Nobel Prize she won. Is Trump right then when he says there's not enough support and trust for the opposition because it is so fragmented and just dysfunctional?
Well, in terms of Maria Corina, he did not say that she didn't have this support. He said she doesn't have the respect, and he means she doesn't have the power. I think most of the people are in Venezuela and outside are against government, but that doesn't mean that they are unified enough to offer a real alternative in terms of resources and personnel to run the country right now. And if I think Maria Corina here right now, she does not have the power about security infrastructure. She does not have the power about the bank accounts. It would be really, really difficult for her to run the country under this actual circumstances. Maybe and hopefully in a couple of months, when we stabilize the situation here and we have really free elections, the oppositional forces can step in and do what we all also want: make the Venezuelans decide for the destiny of Venezuela. But right now, I don't see how that would be possible in this moment, in this very moment.
Yeah, let's talk about one word we haven't touched on, which I think is crucial to this whole system, which is corruption. And you just mentioned that. You just explained how complex it is. And we've talked about the generals before, and everyone's got their hand in one pie, and everyone wants their cut, and anyone who may not be corrupted is outside of the country. How does this, for you as a average citizen on the street, play out? Can you feel corruption in your daily life? Is that something that you're aware of?
I mean, what you see is a very deep political, social, and economic crisis all over the country. And I think a side effect is corruption because people have to survive somehow. What you really see is also the fact that a quarter of the population left the country. I mean, especially between 2016 and 2022, which were the worst moments of political protest, repression, criminality, hyperinflation, and exploding poverty rates. Also, almost everyone has a family member, a friend, or ex-colleague who left the country. Even though the supply situation right now is much better and medicine is available again, the prices of many products are unaffordable for many Venezuelans. Let's remember that we have 90% of the population who are poor and 50% live in extreme poverty. That are reasons for corruption and clan structural systems. The horrible irony in that is that Venezuela was once the wealthiest country in the region in the 70s and in the 80s, and is now the less prosperous, facing this multiple political, social, and economic crisis. And yeah, you can see this everywhere.
I've heard those figures as well, but then Hugo Chavez, who was clearly very charismatic and very, very successful, at least in the early days, I would say, his government for the first 5 to 10 years always claimed that we really made a difference in people's lives. Like, we lifted a majority of Venezuelans out of poverty through our reforms, whatever they were. And that, like in pre-Fidel Cuba, yes, it was a wealthier country, but it was a much smaller margin of the population actually receiving that wealth. And I know it's very unequal now from what I hear. Like you said, majority of people do live in poverty yet again. Is there a passion for that form of socialism still? What is the sentiment coming out of this? Like, do people believe in the concept and the idea and they just think Maduro hasn't got it right? Or do they just want hardcore US-style Western capitalism? What's the sentiment on the street?
I think if you talk with government supporters, and they still exist, they would blame the US sanctions or the international sanctions for the whole crisis, which is not true. And it is also not true to say that everything was right before and then Chavez came and everything got worse. No, the situation is much more complex, and maybe you have to accept also some contradictions who go side by side. Yes, there were poor people before Chavez came, and there was corruption. The power was in the hand also of a bipartisan system. But still, you cannot negate that right now the middle class and the general wealth of the country got affected, and especially after the oil prices fall. And the money right out, and you could not finance anymore the social programs, which led to this high migration numbers. And 25% of the country don't leave because everything is fine and because the social policy is working. I mean, you see that some things have to be wrong. And the worst moments, let's say 2017, 2018, 2019, when the supermarkets were empty. And even though you had money, you could not buy anything because there was not anything to buy. I think socialism also lost the attraction, even though it's also true that the international sanctions and the blockade of Venezuelan petroleum made the situation even worse and did not help.
We talked about the economic side a lot, but before you did mention the security services, and you also spoke about a torture center. I'm not sure it's the word that you used, but what's that like for people? So do people just get arrested in the middle of the night and then dragged into torture cells? And how oppressive is the regime?
I think people, they stopped talking about politics too much. Also because it divided the country. Because at the beginning, Chavez was a figure who separated families, and because someone were supporting other person. And the repression started with the big protests, with the student protests, right now, what we have were the detention. So people got, people close to the opposition or opposition politicians or their families. They got caught and are in several prisons. And this happened again in a bigger scale before and after the elections in 2024. After a period of tranquility, let's say. I mean, when the economic situation got a bit better and the security, criminality issues were much better. That was like during the pandemic and the time afterwards. It was not necessary to be that repressive. But when the government saw that losing the power could be a real option, they started to be quite repressive again. And we have hundreds of political prisoners right now, which are being freed in this very moment. And right now, people are afraid of, for example, having contents on their cell phones, which could bring them close to positional statements. And that happened actually also after the elections, when people left their phones at home because the police could stop you and then imprison you.
So there's a self-censorship happening there just to preserve your own safety.
And also self-censorship by the few really working journalists in the country, which also a lot of people left. And that's a big problem with the information gap. A lot of people talk from outside of Venezuela because there are not very much journalists left. They also the people who are here are kind of self-censoring themselves in order to not get into trouble.
Which is why we here at Putschcast talk to you, Dr. Thomas Schaumberg, to have someone on the ground, not just talk from the outside about Venezuela, but actually someone who's there on the ground. Thank you again for your time. But for context, so what brings someone like you to Venezuela? What's your connection to the country?
The Goethe Institut, I'm the director of the Goethe Institut, as I said, and the Goethe Institut is the cultural institute of the Federal Republic of Germany with a global reach. So we do not only exist in Venezuela, but in like 100 countries. And our mission is to promote the German language abroad, to foster international cultural cooperation, and to convey a comprehensive view of Germany. And we've been present here in Venezuela for several decades and strengthened the German language through our courses, language courses, and cooperation with stakeholders in the educational system, and have a very vast cultural program. We facilitate, for example, exchange between German artists and the local cultural scene in fields of film, dance, theater, and literature, and have also with the Library Information Center that provides an up-to-date picture of Germany and offers information on studying, living, and working in Germany. It's now been three years and a half that my headquarters sent me here, and I'm quite happy and very grateful to live and work with Venezuelan people, despite the traumas and difficulties that they have been facing through the last decades. Never let them lose their hospitality, warmth, and willingness to help. And so for me, it's a privilege to live and work here in Caracas.
So are you a soft diplomat?
Yeah, I would say we are like one part of the German cultural diplomacy landscape, together with the political foundations and the German schools and the academic exchange service. We are doing a lot for building bridges between societies and to keep doors open where maybe the political context would close them.
And do you know how much longer you will be in the country? Will you be observing this, and maybe we can talk to you again in the future?
Yeah, I mean, my contract terminates in August this year, so I have half a year left. It's a 4 years mission.
Thank you again for staying up late for us, and we'll stay in touch. And all the best to your team as well on the ground. They're doing fantastic work promoting German culture and language.
Yeah, and thank you for having me here.
Putschcast. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram to find out about the latest coup coming your way.
That was Dr. Thomas Schaumberg from the Goethe Institut in Caracas. That was a soft diplomat, as he calls himself as well. Have you heard of an institution like the Goethe Institut before?
Soft power. Very underrated, but very important in today's world. Places like the Goethe Institut, where Thomas works, essential in building bridges culturally, linguistically between countries, and also a good offset against the nuts and bolts and zero-sum game of pure economics and trade.
Yes, David, and not every Western country has an institution like that. And if we've just watched the latest events coming out of Washington, where Trump cut again funding for another 66 institutions, some of them similar to that, doing development work, also in the cultural space in developing countries, it shows that there is more than just cold, hard diplomacy. There are avenues for communicating between countries that may not have the best relationship, as Venezuela and the US do right now.
That's right. And every move that Trump makes to cut these, and the funding, if you look at them in isolation, would not be significant. But the message that it is sending, that you are shutting down these channels of soft power between countries, and the dialogue that they allow you to have, says something significant about their worldview and what they value.
We talked about the escalation of tensions between two countries. Watching media in recent months, I had an impression that Venezuela is almost Iraq equivalent in South America to the dying days of Saddam. I have a very different impression now after listening to Thomas, who can clearly speak freely and openly about what's happening on the street. Did you have the same impression?
That's right. In a number of these countries, and we're using the Middle East, I think, as an example, someone who can talk about the significant challenges facing the regime, how they have been fundamentally undermined, and also the response that they may or may not have taken, is something that you will not hear. And a number of people, dissidents or even observers in other countries, are not able to share freely in the way that he did. And again, because this is a person who is openly acknowledging that they are part of a cultural institute, they have a position of responsibility. This is someone who doesn't fear repercussions or reprisals based on the information that he's providing about the weaknesses of the regime that he's living under.
And I wonder if we could have that very same interview with someone in Putin's Russia today.
Absolutely not.
Which is obviously not a friend of Trump's, but it's someone that he doesn't think worthy of capturing in the middle of the night from the Red Square.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Motorcycle Rental Melbourne, your ticket to an amazing adventure on two wheels across Australia. Motorcycle Rental Melbourne is your gateway for the most spectacular way to explore the fifth continent. Visit motorcyclerentalmelbourne.com.au to check out the fleet. Don't forget to mention Putschcast for a 10% discount on your next rental. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Putschcast, and today we have somewhat of a special episode on Venezuela. We've just heard from Dr. Thomas Schaumberg in Caracas, and who was there that night when bombs went off. First time for him as well. Things seem to have calmed down since then, but now let's hear from someone on the ground who's not in Caracas, but in the east of the country. And like us, he's a fellow Australian.
He is. So an expat who's been living there on and off for a number of years, Venezuelan wife. He'll introduce himself. He has a very different take on life in Venezuela compared to what we see in the traditional media, or the vision and the, I suppose, what you might get from experts in terms of what life is like on a daily basis in that country.
My name is Phillip Campbell. In 2009, I met a girl online who is now my wife. In 2010, I came back and married that girl and lived here in Venezuela for 6 months before we started the process for us to go live in Australia. Then in 2024, we moved back to Venezuela. We'd taken advantage of during the crisis to buy ourselves a family home. However, I still go back and forth a bit because I don't have permanent residency as yet. I'm on a family transient visa. Shortly, I'll be applying for permanent residency. So I actually spent 6 months back in Australia last year, and I just returned in November 2025.
Thanks for joining us on Putschcast today, Phil, and making the time over in Venezuela. Where exactly are you located in Venezuela?
So we live in Maturin, in the state of Monagas, on the eastern side of Venezuela, where all the petrol and gas is, big petrol and gas area here.
And was the 3rd of January where history was made in Venezuela. The president disappeared overnight. Everyone around the world watched it on the news. Where were you that night?
I was here asleep in my bed. My wife got a phone call early in the morning. My wife actually has a nephew in the National Guard, so as part of the army. My wife got a call at about 2:30 in the morning saying, "Auntie, we're under attack. Caracas has been bombed." So pretty scary stuff. Because my wife's obviously quite religious, being Latina. She was going to go pray with her mother. She said, "I'm going to go pray." She woke me up and said, "Caracas has been bombed," to make my son breakfast, and she was going to go pray with her mother. And I was disoriented. I didn't understand what she was saying. It didn't sink in, you know. And then she said it again. Obviously, it was in Spanish, and it's like, "Caracas has been bombed." I was like, holy shit. Pretty scary when you wake up. Yeah, Caracas has been bombed, you know.
Because tensions in the media said tensions have been building for a long time, but I think tensions have been building one way, from America towards Venezuela. Or did you, living in Venezuela, did you have the feeling that the Venezuelan government was threatening America?
No, not at all. No, quite the opposite.
Just before, we spoke to someone who was in Caracas that night, and he said everyone knew something was coming, but we didn't expect what actually happened. So were you the same? Did you have a feeling that there was tension and maybe military interventions by the Americans?
We don't know. I was trying to monitor it fairly closely. For a while there, I started to believe that Trump was full of shit and he wouldn't do anything for most of it. My wife and her family had an overwhelming feeling that something was coming, maybe. Yeah, they pretty much did. They knew something was coming.
How do you monitor the unfolding events? Do you have sort of access to all of the same news resources, etc., that we have? And I suppose, how was it presented in the Venezuelan media as well, that build-up and that escalation?
I speak, obviously, Spanish and English, so I can get the Spanish news as well. I follow a lot of Spanish, different who are more left-leaning and more right-leaning, and even from Colombia. So I much like you do anywhere, I take both extremes and I sort of find the truth in the middle. Funnily enough, I can even watch Sky News from Australia here. So
right.
I listen to their rubbish, but it gives me a heads up as to what crazy, like the rhetoric that's coming out of that camp.
Because I suppose all we hear about in Venezuela is the negatives. We're talking about an economy that has collapsed. We're talking about a country which is riddled with corruption, with infrastructure that doesn't work, with bare necessities out of reach of lots of people, high unemployment, etc. How accurate is this portrayal that we get of Venezuela for you, for someone who's been in and out and obviously has deep connections to people who live there and have lived there a long time.
I mean, I'm an Australian citizen. My wife's an Australian citizen. We could all go live in Australia if we want. We'd prefer to live here. So if that doesn't tell you enough, a lot of these people are saying they can't come back and are waiting for them to remove Maduro. I think from 2020 onwards, anyone could have come back here, and it's very safe here. I can tell you that. It's safe, and it was safer now in these last couple of years that I've been here than it was when I was coming in here in, 2010, 11, 12. I think with the crisis, a lot of the criminals left. There was a big change in the mind shift. It's a very interesting place, Venezuela. And it was the people themselves that got themselves out of the crisis. It wasn't the government at all. The government, they are corrupt. They didn't do shit. The people, they changed their mindset and they said, look, if anyone's going to help us, the people, and get us out of this shit, it's going to be us. So there's a big shift in the mindset. So living over here, maybe it's not for everyone, but I had to accept some things you sacrifice, you miss out on, but you gain other things. And for me, the things that I gain from here are the things that are truly important in life. The things that I miss out on aren't that big a deal to me. There are failing systems and stuff like that. You could say that, but I can honestly tell you, everyone here is, despite it all, and that's what's impressive, everyone here is really happy. It's a really happy life.
Thomas, that we spoke to earlier, confirmed the same thing. So he said about 5-6 years ago was probably the worst, and things actually have improved. Healthcare is better. Yeah. There's more food in the shops. What is happening right now? Maybe explain to us. Obviously, people were hoarding because they didn't know what was going to happen. But is the country now getting back to normal? Are the shops stacked with goods, or what's it like right now after the intervention?
I saw here in Maturin, we didn't see too much hoarding over on my side. Probably in Caracas, there's a lot more. And I heard that over on the western side of the country, there's a bit more. I have access to a lot of local social media, TikTok and Instagram, they use a lot. And that's where you get a lot of information from in today's age. We all do. I saw some reports of, panic buying and stuff like that. But I really only saw it lasted for a day and a half maximum, and then it sort of dithered out, I'm not sure about the other side of the country, but I went shopping the next day and I could buy everything I wanted. And as I said, it's quite safe. And another thing with it being so safe, or I don't know what's going to happen now, but it was so safe because I think because of the struggles and because of the poverty and the corrupt government or what have you, because I'm not going to lie and say, it's all roses over here. There was no corrupt government or anything. A lot of the young kids that would have gone to the streets and robbed and killed and had nothing and grown up poor and just gone out and started robbing, they sort of got into this mindset where, well, if I can't beat them, join them. So the place is flooded with military, but they're all kids, but they're all on side with the government. You know what I mean? So you go to all these military checkpoints and there's military everywhere. There's no petty crime. No one's robbing and stealing and shit like that and kidnapping because there's military. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's safe. It's very safe, yeah.
Phil, you are an Australian. You've been contacted by other media as well recently because of the events, which tells me that there aren't too many of you there in Venezuela. Is there an Australian community or another English-speaking expat community that you are linked to in any way or form?
There's a few other Aussies over here. There's at least one I know of, actual Aussie. There's a few other English speakers I've seen online on social media and stuff. There's another Aussie guy over on the other side of the country who's got himself an Airbnb type setup over there. So far I know of me and another guy.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. You're probably close friends.
No, we're not. I hardly know that. He's on the other side of the country. He's reached out to me one day.
Which brings us to how we've come across you, which is your YouTube channel. Phil, so what's Phil doing is the question that we should ask on YouTube in order to find your channel. Yeah, and tell us about your YouTube channel and how do the locals respond when you walk around with your camera and what are the main topics that you cover?
Topics I cover, man. It's just my life and what I'm doing over here, but slowly, I'm pushing the narrative more of, as you said, becoming an ambassador for Venezuela, showing how good it is. And I was on a mission to try and increase tourism, and do my part for the country, because if I love the country so much like I say I do, then try and do something positive as well. And how do the people react? Mate, I'm growing fairly quickly over here, let's say that. So the more people react very well. The majority of them reacted very well. However, even before this happened, I will say there are some very old school patriotic guys that would see me and be like, Yankee, they think that automatically think I'm a Yankee and I'm here to infiltrate.
Yeah.
I'm here to infiltrate with my camera. I have been detained a couple of times for filming. I don't know, there's a vlog on my channel where I've been detained for quite a long time. I actually got to the military base in Caracas, the Fuerte de Yuna. Spent the whole day there.
Do you think you got treated differently because you're a Westerner?
No, I don't know. If I got treated differently, it'd be because I'm a Westerner that's married to a Venezuelan and have been for a long time. So they say he's a good guy. He's one of us.
And they probably know your channel and they know that you are a spokesperson for the country.
They didn't when they got me. They do now.
One question I was going to ask about being detained, it wasn't an arduous process getting out. Once they kind of had you and you'd established who you were, it didn't take much for them to sort of let you go, and there weren't any further repercussions or anything like that?
No, repercussions, no. After it was done, it was done. My wife was furious, but the day was a nightmare. Basically, what happened, we sort of analysed it looking back now that maybe the police would have thought they could extort me. So I was picked up by some police officers in Caracas for just going around. I was filming in very touristy areas in the colonial parts of the city, close to Simon Bolivar's house. And I was going around filming, and then I went and sat down for a little while. I was picked up by some police officers. And then I think once they got me, and this is what we sort of, in hindsight, what we're sort of, when we analyse it, we're thinking may have happened, because there are corrupt officials here, no doubt. But once they got me and they saw that I sort of knew what was going on. I'd been married to a Venezuelan for so long, and they weren't going to be able to extort me. I think they didn't know what to do with me, so they reported it to the next level, to their boss, who reported to their boss, and they didn't know. So I went up the chain so much that by the time that the Secret Service guys came to get me, they even admitted to it. We don't know why they called us for such a simple thing, just a guy with a camera. But now that it's been done, we have to follow protocol like they had. So they took me to the military base. My wife, luckily, they went and picked her up later, and she came and signed me out. But yeah, it was a whole ordeal. It's on my YouTube channel. You can watch it all on there. I speak about the whole thing. Otherwise, I have to go through it all. But yeah, it wasn't pleasant, man.
But good to learn that there's bureaucracy in Venezuela as well. Once you detain someone, you got to follow protocol. You can't just follow common sense and let them go again.
Yeah, and then look, I had to sign these things that, like, I remember when I was in the military base. Which, look, I'm not going to lie, it was scary. When the Secret Service boys came to get me and take me away from the police station I was at, and I didn't know where I was going, that was scary, you know.
Absolutely.
But they were cool with me. They were asking me about Australia, making jokes about kangaroos and stuff. They were doing their best to make me feel welcome, like not scared, to make sure I wasn't scared. And I had to turn to them and say, listen, guys, this is too much now. I've done nothing wrong. If anything, I'm here. Anything I show on my channel is just to benefit the country. I said, this is getting too much. So and eventually they said, all right.
Does Australia still have a representation in the country? Is there an embassy or a consulate at least?
Only in Colombia.
Okay, so you have to go to a neighboring country. We want to thank you for all your time, Phil, but we do want to end up asking the question, because no one's really digested what just happened yet. Where do you see the future of the country in the next couple of months, but also long term?
It's hard to say. Everyone's just watching, awaiting. Apparently, Trump's going to work with the same government that's in power. So which sort of begs the question, then what was the whole show about? Because Maduro had offered, and Maduro is not a saint, and we're not fans by any means, don't get me wrong on this, but I just call the truth. I try and sit as biased as I can, because at the end of the day, it's not my country. Maduro, I saw it with my own eyes. He was saying to Donald Trump in the United States, yeah, I'm happy. I'm ready to negotiate whenever you want. Let's talk. Let's talk about business. Let's talk about this. Let's do it, you know? So that tells me he's sort of still pushing all-out war, like he wants to occupy fully. Otherwise, why did he go and kill the fishermen? And why was he sort of pushing for retaliation from Venezuela to justify an occupation? That's what it seems like. But then on the other hand, it looks like, all right, he's made a deal now with the Venezuelans. Obviously, they can't just kick out the Venezuelans and take over like they're saying they can. They just can't do that. The government here is too far entrenched as well. They rule the country. They're going to have to work with them. So I don't know. It begs the question, like, what's it all about? What is going to happen now? I don't know. It looks like everything's going to go smooth. Is the lady in power going to stay in power now? Who knows? Was there, politics are dirty. Was there someone behind? Is it all just a setup for this, for that to move? It's watching and waiting now.
I think that's what we'll have to do. And again, thank you for your time, Phil. And what Phil's doing is the channel to look up to find out what it's like being detained for a day, but also how beautiful the country is, the markets, the food. You talk about all this stuff.
And the sense of community.
Yeah, just general life, everyday life. Well, it's because it's a country, it's like seldom spoken about. A lot of people don't know about it. So if you want to have a look, at life in Venezuela, jump on the channel, take a look, guys.
That was Phil Campbell from Venezuela, an Australian expat who knows the country quite well, speaks Spanish fluently, and is married to a local. David, speaking to him, what moved you the most?
I think his honest reflection about the mood of the country, accentuating those positive elements we're not privy to through traditional media and most of the representations of the country. The fact that a number of the people who are committed to Venezuela succeeding, their voices are not heard. And we're not talking about people who are politicized necessarily, but people who have a deep love and commitment to that country and the community of that country as well. So I found that interesting. And also talking about his incident with the security forces, that he was, you could say, treated respectfully and kindly, despite the fact that it could look quite suspicious for a foreigner. And he established that there are not many expats, especially in his part of the country. I found that quite interesting as well. So if we're talking about the level of repression in that country, and we have the colectivos on the streets ensuring that there is law and order, the fact that this man was detained, went through, it sounded like a number of different levels of the security apparatus, was able to make his way out of that system without any repercussions, says a lot, I think.
I think what we learn on this podcast again here is that every dictatorship is different, where Westerners usually try to tart with the same brush and pigeonhole dictatorships.
No one dictatorship know them all.
They are so different, and we all think it's all horror. You know, you couldn't survive for a week there, but clearly someone like Phil proves that you adapt and you make it work, and there's good things almost everywhere on the planet.
I think he's championing the spirit of the people in that country as well. And
He
again,
does.
in those types of dictatorships, we think that it is just a seething bed of repressed sort of political angst. People are just waiting for a system to be overthrown so they can, revel in freedom or whatever that means. But it feels like the people there have a different idea of the priorities in life.
And I think this is what the key question is here. What does the future hold? We've learned about the new president, Delcy Rodriguez. We've learned she's very skilled, she's experienced, she knows what she's doing. And you know what? While the Americans may not have a long-term plan, I think they had this power transition in mind from day one. Question remains, was she involved? Maybe she was. Who knows? Historians will find out. But what comes next? And as we've learned in history, this can easily destabilize a country.
It can. Can I firstly begin with external actors, namely the US, because recently, very recently, the US Senate voted to advance a resolution that would bar Trump from taking any further military action against Venezuela without congressional authorization. This included a number of Republican senators voting with the Democrats to make this the case. It's pretty clear that this extraordinary event is one that the lawmakers in the US do not want to see replicated. They do not want to see any additional boots on the ground, we might say. We get a lot of rhetoric out of Washington, and almost contradictory depending on whether it's coming out of Trump or Rubio's mouth, about what the US is going to do next in Venezuela. But we can, I think, quite clearly rule out any further military intervention in that country.
And if Trump is good at something, it's setting the news agenda and controlling the narrative. This action, whatever we call it, I think, do we agree it's not a putsch?
Not at all. So the term we looked up, I think I mentioned it earlier in the episode, is extraterritorial abduction.
Trump, by doing that, has sent such a warning signal to anyone else in the region.
He openly said, Colombia, you're next initially, but I think reading the news today, or was it last night, after a phone call with the Colombian president, that's off the table.
But Cuba's on the list, and now he's moved far up north to look at Greenland once more.
Mm-hmm. The thing about Cuba, which is interesting, they're heavily dependent on, in terms of energy, on Venezuela. So if Trump, both Rubio and Trump are agreed that they are going to exert some influence over the oil industry in that country, this could be one of the big sort of levers that they use to pressure Cuba, and who knows what comes next if they have that capacity to turn off the tap, so to speak. So that will be an interesting one to follow in the next couple of months.
I've learned a lot today, David.
I've learned a massive amount about this country, and again, going beyond, you could call it superficial, our understanding of the Western media's portrayal of Venezuela, what life is like for the people in it, and how it operates. So, no, I feel far better informed now than I was 24 hours ago.
And I hope you out there, our listeners, do the same. This is Putschcast. Do you have any feedback for us? Send us an email, putschcast@gmail.com. You can find us on your favorite socials, and please hit subscribe if you haven't done so. If you do know anyone who's got a similar interest, please let them know about Putschcast. Yes, we're still small, but we're growing rapidly, and we need all the support out there to bring even better insights, more experts, and fascinating topics your way. Speaking of fascinating topics, we are going way back, 500 years into history after this episode. What's on the card, David?
We're talking to an expert from Vancouver about Thomas Müntzer, who was Martin Luther's nemesis. And we'll be digging into the peasant wars and his rather sticky end.
He was a preacher who called for violence and died by the sword.